This is Roll Call for this edition of African Drums. The African drums are sounding.
Good evening. Welcome to African Drums, the television organ of the Cuffy 250 Committee, an organization dedicated to the empowerment of the African Guyanese community through education and the encouragement of self-activity. I am Elsie and I will be your host for this evening's program. As the University of Guyana workers battle the powers that be for a living wage and improved working conditions, the country is once again reminded of the dignity of labor and the state of labor relations in Guyana. The right to strike for better conditions has always been a controversial right in Guyana and the world at large. Yet, it is perhaps the most important human and constitutional right, as it speaks directly to the right of life. If a person does not have the ability to earn a living wage, it hampers his or her ability to provide the basic needs of life. It is for that reason that the struggle for a living wage is so essential. Cuffy 250 wants to begin a conversation on this vital issue. We start the conversation today by exploring the history of the trade union movement in Guyana. To do that, we have invited comrades Lincoln Lewis and Norris Witter, who are both trade unionists. And they've informed me before we came on air that when you're a trade unionist, you get referred to as comrade. Is that correct?
Yes, thanks, it is.
Okay, so comrades, welcome to African Drums.
Thank you,
thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so Comrade Witter, I'll begin with you. You've heard our introduction. Do you agree that it is important that we begin a new conversation on labor and the labor movement in Guyana? If yes, why?
The new conversation on labor actually started, and that is from a global perspective, many years ago. When it was recognized that because of the imperatives of globalization, one could not continue to adopt the old conventional way in conducting the one's relationship. That is the relationship between the trade unions, the employers, and even the state. Because very often, particularly in our circumstance, the state still remains the largest employer. Now, historically, the relationship between unions and employers was one of an adversarial, confrontational nature. However, the new dispensation requires that within this 24th century, in an era of enlightenment, that what is required is a shifting of the paradigm from a relationship of conflict, confrontation, and bitterness and adversity to more one of cooperation and one of consultation, where the parties engage each other in a very mature, responsible way, researching whatever information is required for the discourse and articulating your position in a very persuasive way with an intention of the parties arriving at an amicable resolution. In other words, what one should strive for, first of all, there must be the determination within the process of collective bargaining by both parties to reach agreement, right? And therefore I'm suggesting that that discussion must take place in an atmosphere of what is called good faith bargaining, right? And if one approaches negotiations within that in that mode, then you're likely to reach a consensus, to find common ground, and ensuring that the outcome is mutually beneficial to all the parties. You've made reference to the recent UG fiasco, and it must be considered a fiasco because it is more than tragic that within this 24th century, in what is referred to as the knowledge-based era, that a state, a government, can allow a dispute, and a dispute that led to the virtual shutting down of your premier tertiary education to last for more than 5 weeks. No, and why I say it would have been comical if it had not been so tragic. Comical in the sense that I do not believe that no other part of the world a state would have allowed its only tertiary institution to be closed for this protracted period of time. Tragic in the sense that it is recognized universally that there can be no human and national development unless emphasis is placed on the development of your young people, right? You know, when I surveyed what has been happening over those 5 years, what I've observed is that the leadership of the unions have demonstrated a greater degree of maturity, a greater degree of responsibleness, and a greater degree of flexibility in order to bring sanity to the madness that has been going on there. Guyana is known as the second poorest country within the CARICOM, and it leaves one to wonder that when you treat your university student in such a manner, whether as a nation we are now hoping to win that coveted title as being the poorest country in the Caribbean, because I said earlier, you cannot have human and national development without the necessary human capital, the brain power. That is critical, right? We have seen where the dispute is now about to be resolved, but I'm saying in closing that in the first instance, this dispute ought not to have risen. It's a continuation of a dispute that started since 2012, as I understand it, right? And what the unions and the students are demanding, it is what is fundamentally, right? What is fundamentally due to them. It is their right. It is the right of, you know, this, the government, in collaboration with the labor movement and the employers, signed on only recently, within recent past, what is referred to as the Decent Work Country Agenda. And the Decent Work Country Agenda speaks to the question of decent work. It speaks to the question of the respect for trade unions' right, workers' right, and a whole host of others. It speaks to the question of consultation between the parties. And what has been lacking in this whole dispute is the level of consultation that is required. And you know, the whole issue that you refer to as the right to strike. The right to strike is a fundamental right. It is a right that is not only enshrined in our Constitution, but it is the right that is enshrined in International Labour Organization conventions, in the CARICOM Charter of Civil Society, in the Treaty of Chaguaramas, and also the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, right? So for anyone to be pompous enough to question the workers' right to strike, I think is someone who is not living within the 24th century.
Okay. Thank you, Comrade Witter, for putting the labor relations, especially in Guyana, into context for us, especially as it relates to the University of Guyana. Comrade Lewis, let's start from the beginning. We know that the British Guyana Labour Union was the first union formed in Guyana under the leadership of Hubert Nathaniel Critchlow in 1919. Tell our audience what actually led to the formation of that union.
Let me say to you that what we are doing here today is a continuation of a process that started a long time ago.
Yes.
The world is a very dynamic place. Dynamic in the sense that what was applicable in 1905 when Critchlow hit the hammer with the first strike that closed down the waterfront and put the merchants in Guyana in a very difficult position. One need to understand, young people need to understand, and those who have not read, that that Critchlow struggle, which led to the establishment, that started in 1905, that led to the establishment or the registration of the Union in 1919. One of the things we need to understand, that we hadn't legislation before 1990 for registering, but Critchlow started this union in 1905, right, when he called the first strike. That was the trade union is the precursor to the political parties in this country. It is the trade union that started, was the first front that was established by Guyanese to repel the process of exploitation that was being that was rampant during the colonial period, rampant by the merchants in Georgetown. They determined it was a period when you could not have, you and people like you and me who don't own property, we can't go and vote. You have to have property to vote. It was the trade union. Critchlow started this thing. He started this march which led, and you need to understand that the trade union, while it represents the interests of workers at the workplace, but the trade union also has started from Critchlow time, had a social responsibility to the communities within which it operates, where the citizens live, because it was the trade union that started to talk about one man, one vote, right? It was trade union, it was the first front. You have had, so this is what led to the intensification of the movement. Those type of issues, the social issues in society, those are the things that led to it, because people were then appointed to the legislature. Most people were appointed there. What the trade union do is to start the ball. In 1926, you have had the first regional. The history has shown that the first regional engagement of leaders in the Caribbean occurred in 1926 in the city of Georgetown, where labor leaders throughout the Caribbean gathered in Georgetown to discuss issues not only about trade union, but they talk about the British Caribbean, British West Indies Federation. They talk about prison reform. They talk about free education. These are things that we'll discuss. Health services, appropriate health services, and those type of things. And where that was held, it was held in the hollow halls of the parliament in this country, the parliament building. You see, I'm glad that we're having this discussion. The trade union made it possible for all these politicians who are in parliament. And you know, if we ask them today that we want to use the chamber, somebody will ask why you want to come in here. But we make it possible for them to go there. The movement that we represent now made it possible for them to enter parliament. So one need to take on board that the trade union movement has made a very significant contribution to in democratizing, in establishing internal self-government. They have contributed to independence. They have contributed to Republican status, In fact, the trade union movement is grounded on the principle that for the advancement, the achievement and advancement of self-determination in the society. It is something that we need to understand, and we have progressed, and we will continue to progress. We may not do the things the same way that it was done in 1905 or in 1919 or 1926 or 1948 or 1953. We may not do the same thing, because you need to respond to the changes that you don't communicate the same way any longer. There was a time when the communication was on radio. Today it's on television. It is not only on television. We use the internet because that's a tool. The communication mode has to change. We have to adapt to it. But I'll tell you this. While people may say that the trade union is on the downside and it's not relevant now, it will always be relevant. You know why it will always be relevant and there will always be trade union? Because there will always be unscrupulous employers. Because of greed, there will always be employers who will want to exploit workers. Apart from that, there's the old saying: the workers get nothing while the boss eating mutton, and that's always exists. So there will always be trade unions. Norris made reference to the UG strike. I'm going to tell you this. I have sat at the table there with them, and I believe that when you look at what happened with the strike at GGMC and what has happened at UG, the trade union was on the upside. It's rising. I've sat there and I've listened to the leaders in the UGW and the UGSSA. Well, they may be rookies in the movement. I'm going to tell you something. They did a damn good job. And the unsung heroes, those women led by Melissa Eiffel, they did it. I've sat there and those people have articulated the case effectively at every forum. And they must be commended. And those are the future for this movement. I have hope that they are going to take us to the mountaintop. Okay.
During your discussion just now, you made mention to the unions and independence movement. In the 1930s, there were a series of labor uprisings that led to the formation for independence. What role did the unions in Guyana specifically play in those labor uprisings?
Labor was always at the front because there were not political parties there. There were the labor movement was the platform that was used throughout those times. History will show you that there are a number of political leaders who came out of the trade union movement. Jane Phillips, a strong woman who ended up who did a lot of work in the sugar belt, the waterfront and so forth. A lot of people don't even remember of her. Unsung hero. She came out of the trade union movement. You have had Critchlow was there at that time. You have had Polly were there at that time. You have Eden there at that time. And I'm going to tell you, in the 40s, late 40s and 50s, you had Burnham and Jagan. In the labor movement, Jagan started out in the Sawmill and Forest Workers Union before we get into the GIW, which became GAU. Burnham was there in the GLU. So what I'm trying to point out to you here is that the movement has thrown up the political leaders that took us into not only internal self-government, but it took us into independence and republican status.
Let me make this point. Because very often one tends not to pay attention to the definition of the movement. The definition of the movement in essence suggests, and one has to give Critchlow tremendous credit for his work during his tenure, because though he may be considered in our present context to be unlettered, uneducated, because remember he was a school dropout, right? And he started working at a very tender age. He would have been considered now child labor in our context. But he had the foresight and the wisdom to make a connection between what is the definition of the union and essentially the three pivotal dimensions of the struggle of labor, right? He recognized that the struggle was not only social and economical, but it was also political, right? And it is for that reason he knew the importance of what Comrade Lewis said, of universal adult suffrage, one man, one vote. Because even if you were to win for the workers certain benefits and certain rights socially and economically, you recognize that unless those rights are translated into law, then there is no guarantee that the employer, and even the state was one of the employers, would not renege on those conditions. Thus, it brings us to the crucial question of the importance of the vote, right? Now, there are many persons who would say, you see, the right to vote, which was a right that was initiated by Critchlow, it's a right that people died for. It was a right that people were prosecuted and persecuted for. Today, a lot of people are taking that right lightly. You cannot, anyone who does not vote, or say that, well, whether, cannot criticize a regime for not providing proper health care, for not providing quality education, for not making available the basic necessities for its citizens. You have no right to criticize, because you did not exercise that right to determine who should be the persons to manage politically the affairs of the country, which affairs will affect you, whether directly or indirectly. Now, let me just make an analogy as it relates to that. Think about a story that was told to me some years ago, where a class of 10 students planned a party, and they all agreed that they will each bring a cup of wine and throw into this, let's call it this pitcher. So on party day, they will all at least have a cup of wine to drink. But every individual thought that they were either smart or stupid, so they threw water into the container rather than the cup of wine. On the day of the party, each drew from the pitcher, and when they drank, it was water. But they took one of the persons to say, this is naked water, right? And then all said, yes, it is. Imagine a case where, what I'm saying here, in colloquial context, you say, or the proverb, one dirty build dam. Imagine if each individual who qualified to vote were to take the position that we will not vote. And at the end of the exercise, a party wins the government and fails to manage or govern the country in the interest of those very persons individually or collectively did not vote. But had they voted, they probably would have made a difference, where the person elected would have been a person that is more caring, a person that is more grounded and understanding of the issues affecting the working class, and therefore would have been in the best position to deliver for the working people the essentials that they so desperately desire. So what I'm saying is this: is that you do not, you would have lost your right to be critical about any regime if you do not exercise that right to vote in the first instance. That would have qualified you to criticize or to condemn any regime.
Okay, understandable. What do you say to those of voting age, especially the younger population, that say that they don't see anyone who represents their interests on the party list? What do you say to those individuals?
Let me just pick it up from where Norris left off.
Sure.
The right to vote is inherent in the society. One need to understand that if you don't vote, you abrogate your responsibility to speak about what a government does. It is important that all the young people understand that, young and old in fact, understand that if you voting is the first step in determining who leads the country, who manage your business. If you can't change it like this. Governance exists all over the world, and governance and government is a part of the governance structure. Everybody need to come out and vote. And vote because it's your right to vote. It's your right to select the people of your choice. In fact, the trade unions of the TUC of the view that we need to intensify our vigilance to make sure that people vote. The point is that directly to those who get frustrated, I want to tell them that I've been at the front line every day and for years, and just the same, Norris, this is not about the question of being paid to do a job. It's about a commitment, a responsibility that you have to society to make sure that a government is elected by the people, and then we can see, hold them accountable that they operate in the interest of the people.
Okay. Both of you made mention of Critchlow. Do you think that he has been given his rightful place in Guyana's history as an inspirational and transformative leader?
Let me tell you something. Critchlow, I've had some experiences. I don't know the man. I have, in the TUC boardroom, there's a portrait of Critchlow. And there were some people on an exchange visit, and they visited Critchlow. And I said to somebody, this is Critchlow College. I got to TUC boardroom. I said, this is Hubert Nathaniel Critchlow. And there's a guy who came from Australia. He's a professor in Australia, a university in Australia. He came down, he said, hold on, and he ran up and he came back with his camera. He said, this is the portrait of the man. He said, you know, this man is responsible for us in Australia having trade unions. This is the man who broke the barrier. This man, what the man is saying, he has broken the ceiling. He has made it possible in the British Commonwealth for workers. I believe that our elected or political leaders do not give Critchlow the respect or that he deserves. Norris made a point earlier, whether he may be a dropout. Intellectual, he may not be an academic, but his intellectual prowess was far beyond the time that he operated. You're talking about a great man. Critchlow made it possible. I guess when many of the parliamentarians walk in the compound of the Critchlow Labour College, not Critchlow, of Parliament building, because in fact, let me see, Critchlow, the bust of Critchlow, that statue there, it was in Critchlow Labour College compound first, and then during Burnham era they moved it to there. Let me point out to you, I don't believe there's a watch, and I don't believe some of them know that there's Critchlow statue, right? It is because of when I say we, I'm talking about society. We have not done enough to let people understand the importance or the contribution this great man has made to society.
Okay.
More work must be done in the name of Critchlow.
Just to add to what Comrade Lincoln has just said, many may not be aware of the fact that the Parliament bestowed on Yeobot Nathaniel Critchlow a few years ago the status of national hero. However, it is good to do that, but then it begs the question, are those who sat and represented their respective constituency in that parliament to bestow that honor on Critchlow, keeping or to the ideals, working assiduously to maintain or to advance the ideals of Critchlow? And why it is, having bestowed such an honor on this great man, that in the school curriculum, it is the life and work of Critchlow is not being taught. So, is it a case where that exercise in Parliament was merely one of political grandstanding? These are the questions one needs to ask.
And more so, Norris, how they treat with trade unions. You know, I believe that our new politicians, modern day today, I believe that they see trade unions as nuisance, right? They do not see that it's an institution that influences the political, economic and social life in society. They don't see that.
Okay.
The moment that a trade union raises, the moment that the trade union raises questions about how the society is being governed or how political leaders behave towards the constituency, you are dubbed some other name. And more so, many occasions people believe that you ought not, that the trade union ought not to be talking about political issues that are about issues of political nature. But one failed to understand, as one trade unionist put it, that politics is from the cradle to the grave. Politics determine where the next baby, under what condition the next baby will born at the Georgetown Hospital. Politics is what determines where health centers are being located to satisfy the needs of community. And because of that, we must talk about them. And that's what Critchlow, that is the reason that Critchlow sought to build the first trade union.
Okay. While we're speaking about the legacy of Critchlow, the Critchlow Labour College is named for him. Can you say what this institution has been doing to further the legacy of him?
Yes. Let me put it this way. The bylaw, the objective of the Critchlow Labour College is two things. One, is to pursue, is to provide worker education. And worker education means, under that, is to build the capacity of worker, past, present, and future. You don't have to be a worker to come in here. So they run classes in various things to build the capacity of workers. And second, and workers in the sense, like somebody who coming from school and will want a job, and say you want to be a manager, we run like a programs management, programs in human resource management. That is to build that capacity. You may have now, you have also trade union education. It is not an institution strictly to trade union, but to build the capacity of the leaders in the trade union. So what are you doing? And these are things that Critchlow believed in. Because when he played host to the first regional conference, one of the things he talked about, free education. And that is what Critchlow, and Critchlow, the Critchlow Labour College, named after him. These are the type of things those are the dreams that it's being pursued here.
Okay, let us talk about something that is not well known. Talk about the role that Labour played in the formation of the original PPP, and how the Labour Relations Bill, among other things, led to the invasion of Guyana by the British and the suspension of the Constitution in 1953.
I think it has been mentioned before that the trade union movement is the precursor of the political parties,
yes.
right? And it was, let us say, on the back of, or the trade union movement spawned the political parties. They grew out of the political parties grew out of the trade union movement. In 1948, there was the formation of what was referred to as the Political Affairs Committee. The four founders were the two Jagons, Janet Chetty, Hubbard, and Ashton Cheese. Ashton Cheese is the only surviving member. The PAC morphed into the original PPP in 1950. Many people, some are not aware and some pretend not to be aware, that one of the founders of the PPP was Forbes Bonham, along with the J-Guns.
He named it.
Right? The J-Guns, Hubbard, Ashton Cheese, and some others. So what you had in 1950 was one national united party, right? In 1953 there was a problem, which led to the suspension of the Wellington Constitution, as it were, at the time. Now, just to give you a synopsis, the suspension had to do with the intent of the bill, the Labour Relation Bill, which, according to the British, sought, if the bill was passed, it would have placed such powers in the hands of the government to have full control over, as they refer to it, define it, not only the economic, social, and political space, but also the industrial space, right? That bill, to some extent, is similar to the Trade Union Recognition and Certification Bill, right? What the suspension did, in effect, it caused the bill to lapse, that bill to lapse. Another attempt was made for the passage of a similar bill in 1963. That is now history, right? It led to chaos, right? Well, there is such a bill in place at the moment. Well, it's not a bill. It's a law now, right? The Trade Union Recognition Certification Act, which was passed in 1997. But exactly what gave rise to the fear of the British in 1953 is now cause for fear by us Australians. Because what we're seeing is that the bill was amended a few years ago that reflected in many ways the bill that was presented in 1953. And what is happening is that even though this bill, the intention was to make it easy for the granting of recognition and certification to unions, the whole process is being manipulated by this devious regime to shut out unions that are considered, what they considered to be anti-government. That's what they brand you. Anti-government, hostile to the government, and unfriendly. And those unions that are perceived to be friendly, who are basically lackeys of the government, they are given easy passage. So when some argue, like for instance the Minister of Labour, I've heard him on many occasions, and many others, say that there's been a reduction in the density of membership in this country. They must know that they are the ones, because of the manipulation of the act, that is responsible for the reduction in the density of union membership in this country. Because many unions, I'm aware, who have recruited in excess of the threshold that is required for recognition, have had their applications either frustrated or manipulated to such an extent where recognition and certification were denied those unions. They have been, the very law is being violated with impunity by the state, right? And you know, let me make reference to this fact. The very dispute that is about to come to an end at the University of Guyana, we have heard where the ministry and others have been using, they use as a means of frustrating the whole process and causing the prolongation of this dispute, the notion of the administration not discussing the dispute under what they say is duress. And outdated, and what should I say? Such a position, one would only expect someone who is not, who is insensitive, who is not up to date with modern industrial relations principles and practices, who is inflexible, right, and uncreative, to take such a position. And I'm happy that they have come to their senses and have decided to do just that. Negotiate under this so-called duress, right, in an effort to bring this madness to an end.
Can I just make
Sure.
a point on what Norris said there? You know, what worries us right now is that when it comes to workers going on strike, they tell you that in modern day we need to talk and they ought not to be strike. But when it comes to talking, you tell us that the principles that operated in 1925 need to be applied now. The issue, I've been in this business a long time, and the whole notion about not negotiating under duress is outdated. When there's war in Bosnia, people in Europe discussing how we're going to end it. You're telling me that you cannot work out. When there's a strike, you should wait until the return to work, then we can sit down to discuss what caused the strike. You ought not to. You know why you got a strike and why I encourage strike? Because there are managers who believe that they can do anything. They can send a worker, they can box a worker. And when they box the worker or assault the worker in some form, and that person go off the job, the person retaliate, the first thing they do, they send the person off the job. Workers strike. And you're telling us that they're telling the unions they ought not to strike. We should sit down and discuss it. Right? Because the state, the operatives in the state, in the government, and the operatives in private sector, they are equally abusive. There are people, what people do, what we have we live in an era where people don't respect rules, time-honored principles and practices. What they do is to abuse authority, abuse the privilege that has been placed on us to manage. Look at the government, how they operate, even with even with health services. Who they give it to. They take the workers, they take the people's money and they use it among themselves for their own purposes and discriminate against the people. So we got to do something. Strike is necessary and it must happen. It must remain here and it must happen at the appropriate times.
Okay. Both of you have continuously made the point that the political parties grew out of trade unions. Is there then no demarcation between labor and politics?
Very often people tend to confuse trade union politics and party politics and national politics and so on. As I said earlier, there are essentially three struggles within the movement: the social, the economic, and the political struggle, which is seen as the highest form of struggle within the labor movement. Right? What one needs to appreciate is the fact that the political struggle of the labor movement is a more national struggle. It's a bipartisan struggle. Right? It is not a partisan struggle. Right? You see, the labor movement, by essence, what it does, it unites, it brings together portions of all political persuasion, religious, ethnic, racial extraction together under one umbrella. While on the other hand, political parties, particularly in relation to what occurs in Guyana, divide the society, because every political party is, as the name says, a part of the society. But more than that, the society is divided because of what occurred in 1957 and the way it happened, where two very influential, charismatic leaders, right, went in the different directions, were of different races, and as a consequence had their following of the same race. So what you had is not only the party dividing the society, but also that division reflected a racial ethnic division. Right? But if you look at unions, within the membership of unions are persons of all the political parties, right? All religious denominations, ethnic, racial extraction, and so on. So that is how it has been. That is the way it continues. However, what is unfortunate is that we have seen where, through the engineering of the political parties, they have sought to divide the unions to reflect the division within the political the party arrangement. However, and that is why it is important for union leadership to determine. You see, for instance, look, what we have is a lot of contradictions within the system, right? And there are times when you cannot determine whether a trade unionist is a trade unionist per se, or whether he's a politician in the sense that he's representative of a particular political party. Now let us, as an instance, use the GAU, right? Now, the president of GAU is a member of parliament. The leadership, the founder, I shouldn't say the founder, right? Because Jagan, one of the founders of the PPP, was also a prominent leader within GAU, right? It is difficult to separate GAU from the PPP. They are virtually, I normally refer to it as the hydra head monster, right? Because those who control the PPP also controls GAU. So that is a classical case of a union that is part of a political party that plays partisan politics, right? But appears at times to create a false impression that it is acting as a legitimate trade union. And if one were to look at the historical political behavior of that party, particularly when the people was in opposition, the whole question of what happened in the sugar state in terms of the political strikes and all those things, right? You could clearly see that here was a case where a union was wearing the cloak of a trade union, but in effect was operating more as a political party.
Okay, and we see even in 2015 that some unions have become casualties of political parties. How does that affect the fight for workers for a living wage?
Well, in unity there is strength. And I think it is precisely for that reason. You see, the employer, whether it's the state, and particularly the state, recognizes that to the extent that the unions are united, to that extent they are most effective and efficient in prosecuting their case. Therefore, what they have done, right, is to devise mechanisms, right, of dividing the union, right? Because a divided labor movement is a weak labor movement, right? And while I've heard from the other side, right, utterances that look, advantage is being taken upon labor because we are divided and so on, right? What they are not saying, that they are the ones, through political manipulation, who have contributed to the division. You understand? But I say this to you, as Comrade Lewis said earlier, there is a new awakening, right? And what we're seeing now is a resurgence of the labor movement. You know? And I do not think that there is any force at this moment that can stop the move of the labor movement. And I tell you, and any force, political or otherwise, who believe that they can do so, I think they will be in for a very rude awakening.
Okay. As we're coming to the end of the program, what advice do you have for trade unionists, labor movements, workers? What advice do you have for them before we end the program?
It is also important that we begin to, as trade union leaders, for trade union leaders, that they begin to premise their struggle, position their struggle on the question of rights, rule of law. If we can get, and we need to intensify the awareness among workers in this country, because rights and the rule of law cut across every spectrum in society. The question is that it requires us embracing universally acceptable principles. Unity cannot be, in the trade union movement, cannot be that Norris and I are friends. unity has to be grounded in something. Norris made reference to the industrial relation principles, CARICOM industrial relation principles. We have the ILO conventions. We have the United Nations declarations. These are things that were embraced by countries. And if they're embraced by countries, that means that they're embraced by people. And those are the instruments that must guide us. And not because I may be a supporter of a political party. That means that if they violate the laws or they are doing things that are in breach of the Constitution, I need to turn a Nelson's eye on it. No, I need to say to them that you are wrong. The issue here, if we all can stand up and be guided by the instruments that this country has signed on to, we can hold our leaders accountable. The point is that we need to understand that the time has come for us to run a different country. A country that where our leaders are held by standards, guided by the laws, and where we as leaders of trade unions and other organizations in civil society are prepared to do the same.
Okay. Do you have closing statements, Mr. Witter?
Political parties may come and go. The trade union is here to stay. As the motto says, in unity there is strength. And I want to challenge every worker. Ensure that your trade union leader makes the representation and the preservation of your right priority, and not the self-fulfillment of their or the aggrandizement of themselves.
Thank you, comrades Lewis and Witter, for being on African Drums and for speaking about the labor movement.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, viewers, for staying with us. This has been African Drums, the television organ of the Cuffy 250 Committee, an organization dedicated to the empowerment of the African Guyanese people through education and the encouragement of self-activity. And we see that evidently there is still a need for trade unions. It is evident because of the modern day labor dispute that we have at the University of Guyana. So I'm encouraging the trade unions to stay strong and to keep fulfilling their mandate. We would love to hear from you, our viewers. Please send us an email, cuffy250gy@gmail.com. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for videos of the show. It's also Cuffy250. Thank you for staying with us. This has been African Drums. I am Elsie Harry. Please join us next time.